That's nice. Blade to cut the ring. Sauron's hand. Still sharp.
Hello and welcome back to Lord of the Collections. I'm your host, Tyler Macklem, and my co-host, Val Christ. This is our second episode in our Getting Started Collecting Lord of the Rings series, and today we are going to focus on prop replicas. So when it comes to collecting prop replicas from Lord of the Rings, you have a few choices. There's companies like Cutlery, which have released a huge amount of replicas, and their catalog alone is enough to give you a great collection if you choose to complete their lineup. When it comes to collecting prop replicas, you have three main companies to choose from. You have United Cutlery, WETA Workshop, and the Noble Collection. So what United Cutlery focuses mostly entirely on arms and armor, seen in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And if you're looking for the jewelry, and if that's your thing, from the Lord of the Rings and even a bit from the Hobbit, then the Noble Collection is going to interest you. They have the largest catalog of rings, brooches, jewelries, and trinkets by far that we're seeing in the Lord of the Rings, as well as some of the larger replicas like swords and staffs. However, many replicas made by Noble Collection have long been discontinued and can be extremely difficult to find some of their rare replicas. And then last but not least, you have WETA. They make a bit of everything from swords and staffs to rings, but their replica weapon line isn't as big as United Cutlery's, and their jewelry line is smaller than Noble Collections. So those are the three main companies. So we'll get into the pros and cons of each company, and then we can discuss some of the lesser known companies who were kind of one-hit wonders who came out with one or two prop replicas. So let's get started with United Cutlery. So with a collectible line of replica swords, shields, helms, and staff that spans 20 years, United Cutlery's line is pretty extensive, and it covers almost every major weapon used by the main characters in the trilogy, as well as some lesser well-known replicas by minor characters. So what are some of the pros and cons of collecting the United Cutlery replicas? Well, for starters, United Cutlery replicas are easy to find, and it's easy to start collecting them. With many of the most popular replicas from the trilogy readily available on the Bugcay website. Were there any pros you can think of there, Valchrist, to the UC line?
Well, yeah, you touched on the main one, and that's the ease of availability for one. They've been around, I think they've been producing replicas for pretty much close to 20 years now. I think right around the Return of the King is when they released Sting, which was their first weapon replica, and it just kind of took off from there, and they've been nonstop. So yeah, I mean, there's the few odd piece that whether because it was originally a limited edition or ones that there's some rare ones that have not been reissued for various reasons, but by and large that is definitely your best entry point into this hobby is United Cutlery. And there's a vast amount of retailers out there, both brick and mortar stores, although those are not as common anymore since the collecting craze kind of died out for a bit there in between movies and stuff, or post Hobbit. But definitely online, it's fairly easy. Especially you go on eBay and you find like a ton of United Cutlery replicas. So definitely ease of access and the broadness of their catalog are the two major pluses for sure.
Yeah, with the line being 20 years old, it is fairly common to find old dusty replicas on Facebook Market or Kijiji or Craigslist, and you can usually get some of the more popular ones like Anduriel or the Witch King's Sword or Glamdring for a fairly good price if you hunt online, on some of those buy and sell groups. So it makes it really easy to get into. And I think I know I got into Lord of the Rings collecting. I started with United Cutlery. I think you were the same. For many Lord of the Rings collectors, it is their gateway drug into into collecting Lord of the Rings. Another benefit or pro I can think of for Unite Color is their replicas are usually pretty accurate. I mean, there's the odd exception, and sometimes compromises have to be made for a mass production of a replica, but for the most part, they are pretty accurate. And with UC having access to many of the original props for reference, you know, and to touch on that too, for the price, I think Unite Cutlery offers the most affordable, accurate, and well-made replicas on the market in general. You know, if you're expecting
sure,
to swing
yeah.
these swords around with your friends, you're going to be disappointed because they are built to hang on your wall. And so the way they're engineered reflects that. I mean, these aren't real swords, but wall hangers, but they, I think, are your best bang for your buck when it comes to collecting the replica swords.
Yep. Yeah, definitely want to touch on the fact that despite having been producing these for 20 years, that they have done an amazing job of maintaining their replicas affordable, relatively speaking. Like we've seen other companies like really, especially in the last few years, really go through like some pretty severe inflation on their prices, and United, but when you consider like the cost of metals and shipping the products from overseas, I mean everything. Their original production factory for United back in the early 2000s used to be in Taiwan, and then that got costly, and then United went through bankruptcy and they got purchased by Bud K, and then when they restructured, I think they switched most of their manufacturing to China. They might have already done that pre-bankruptcy, but they've still managed to keep it very affordable for the collectors, and they really do carefully weigh when they're deciding what to make as to whether it's cost effective for them, and if it feels generally if they feel like sure we could make this, but the cost to the customer is going to be so high that they don't think it'll, you know, that would just basically destroy the sellability of the item, then they won't do it. So they won't take the risk, and I think that's a good thing, because that would create a lot of sort of niche weapons that a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford. So they've been able to maintain it at a really good level, which is something I really appreciate.
Yeah, like I think on average their swords cost about $200 US, and they've been that way for a while, and every sword is, for the most part, is that price. You know, it's pretty consistent. And glad you kind of touched on one of the cons, I would say, and it's not really a con of the line, but that, you know, depending on your opinion, a number of the new releases have been made recently have been made from resin instead of the usual stainless steel. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality of mass producing some of these replicas and making them affordable. And if the option is resin or no collectible at all, well, that's an easy choice. After all, I mean, they are display pieces, right?
Yeah.
You know. And then my next kind of point I thought was, this is, depending on your opinion, this is either a positive, negative, or well, but United Cutlery no longer makes limited edition replicas. So if you like your collectibles to be limited editions, that may disappoint you if you're starting out. However, UC has been completing the edition sizes of replicas that were released years ago, but the edition sizes were never completed. So they're kind of bringing back some of these limited editions. You know, they say they made 4,000, but in reality, they maybe only made 2,000 of them, and now they're finishing the runs. So if you're a new collector, it's a good time to get into it, because you can save quite a bit of money, getting some of these reissued replicas that were limited edition that a couple years ago were going for far more on like eBay. You know, but if you like your limited editions, you may be a little disappointed with the fact that UC isn't making any limited editions anymore.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's definitely a choice or a preference.
Yeah.
a personal preference, whether you feel that having something be limited adds to the sort of the prestige of your collection. It definitely adds to the sort of the perceived, I guess, monetary value on the market. When something's limited, obviously it becomes hard to find because they no longer make more. So if you look at your collection as with an eye towards like an investment, I want to, keeping an eye on maybe selling these one day, or or your life circumstances change and you have to get rid of your collection, then it's definitely a plus, because those pieces will increase in price over time. But if that's not something that you care about, to you it's just about owning the piece and having it, then the fact that some of these editions that a lot of people didn't know about, like let's say one of those helms behind you, I think those were 3,000 or 5,000 piece editions or something like that, both the Elendil and the Isildur. And again, when those were made by the first iteration of United Cutlery, and they stopped being produced, a lot of people just assumed that that was it. But as it turns out, because again the company went into bankruptcy, it turns out that they would only make as many as were needed to fill the inventory to sell to retailers, and then once those got sold, they'd move on to the next batch. So they would be making like several hundred at a time, and those full edition numbers were actually never reached. And now that United has new ownership, there's a business opportunity, obviously, to close these editions out without breaking their covenant with the customer that this is a limited edition, and once you reach that top number, that last one of 5,000, then it stops. But as you said, it's a great opportunity to get some of these and not pay some of the prices that folks are asking for them on auction sites. So
I mean, but a good example too of some of the like limited editions that aren't coming back in the UC line would be, the Shards of Narsil. This isn't coming back. And so if you do like your limited editions and you kind of like hunting down the pieces, like this is a good one to kind of hunt down. You can have a lot of fun with that. And it is a fairly prestigious kind of piece to have if you're a Cutlery collector. So what is some advice you would give to new collectors looking to get into collecting United Cutlery and Lord of the Rings replicas in general?
I'd say, take it slow. It's easy to get overwhelmed because they're coming into the game this late, 20 years on since this has begun. There are a lot of pieces out there. And as you said, like if you're a completist, like I tried to be, it can drive you nuts because, first of all, even as affordable as, especially with the reissues, some of these pieces are, it can get expensive fast, especially if you start trying to hunt down the limited pieces that you can no longer get. So take it slow. Part of the fun is that thrill of the hunt. Definitely go kind of really ask yourself, what are the pieces that really speak to you? Like when you watch the movie, what's the sword that you're like, man, I wish I had that, or I really like that character, so I want to own that character's weapons, and kind of start there, like with the things that you just really, really like. And then some people stop there. Some people, for example, they like to theme it. I'll only collect the Fellowship, or I'm not going to have any bad guy weapons because I don't like evil in my collection room or something like that. Or it could be the opposite. You're like, the bad guys have really interesting designs, so I really want Sauron's mace and the Nazgul weapons, and then that's it. That's where I'll stop. So kind of figure out a theme for yourself and go from there. Another thing that you should be careful about is that I don't think it's as prevalent now, but it really took off in the early days, as there still are actually a lot of knockoffs out there. In places like China and Pakistan and stuff like that, you'd be amazed. Like you go online and do your due diligence. If you're buying, especially from eBay,
Mhm.
that this is a United Cutlery product. Look for
Yeah,
the New Line Cinema and United logos etched onto the
yeah, I
blades,
don't know
so
if
that these are official products.
it'll pick up.
Can't quite see it, but it's there. Every single piece will have this etched on one side.
Yeah.
Uh, like the helmets, for example, will have a little plaque inside on the leather lining. They're all marked, and make sure that they're official and that you're not buying a
Yeah,
knockoff, because you're really
like this.
not only doing yourself a disservice by having something that's not official in your collection.
Yeah.
You're also encouraging these guys to basically break copyright laws and keep selling these things to unsuspecting fans. Mind you, not everyone's unsuspecting. Some people know that these are in fact knockoffs, and because they're always pretty much um, way cheaper than the real deal.
Mhm.
And if price really is a concern from you, and you want to have a reasonable, looking facsimile of that weapon in your collection, then hey, you do
Mhm.
have those options. But if you do want the real thing, then make sure. One easy way to spot them sometimes is that um, the seller will only post the product pictures from
Yeah,
United
like
Cutlery. There's no
the,
actual picture of
of the
the
product
prop
you're buying.
itself
Yeah.
in like a real world environment photo.
Yeah.
Um, so you'll often see those with, like, say, like a US based retailer, because they're just posting up the pictures that United sends them as promos, and you can generally trust those. But if you're buying from overseas, especially China or Pakistan or India, where a lot of the knockoffs get made, you'll see those just stock photos and not an actual. So always ask the seller, hey, can you take a couple of photos of the item? And if they don't or won't, or they'll just dodge you, then you're
Yeah.
probably dealing with a fake. Another telltale sign usually is the price. Like if you got an Anduril for $50, yeah. It
Yes,
sounds too good to be true. It probably
yeah.
is. So, like they
I
say,
was
all that
I was
glitters is
gonna
not gold.
mention, yeah, I was gonna mention actually the staying away from knockoffs. And some of the most common knockoffs are Andurial, Peregrine, and Sting, and
Yeah.
Glandring too. I know it can be tempting when you're starting out as a new collector. You're searching on eBay and you see a replica of Andurial from Pakistan or China, and it looks just like a cutlery one, but it's half the price. It can be tempting, and my first sword was a knockoff. It was this Andurial, and I don't know if you can see right in here, but the grinds are uneven. The stitching isn't very good, you know, um, and I would say in the long run, it's something you're going to regret. They have almost no resale value. Made serious collectors aren't interested in them, right? And the deeper you get into collecting as a new collector and your collection grows, the lack of quality and inaccuracies on it is going to become more noticeable to you, especially as you pick up actual licensed replicas, and your satisfaction with it will decrease. So you're better off not trying to save a few dollars and instead just buy a licensed replica right from the start, instead of having to go back and buy the same sword a few years later, because you will save money in the long run. The old saying of buy once, cry once applies here, whether it's a knockoff Noble Collection ring or a sword. There's a good chance
Yeah.
the quality will be lacking, and in case of most, like with the swords, they won't be as accurate as the licensed replicas. And you will probably get uneven grinds like on this knockoff Andurial. And you mentioned an easy way to tell with United Cutlery swords is all United Cutlery swords have that stamp on the one side close to the hilt, and they'll usually say something like New Line Cinema, Made in Taiwan, United Cutlery, Lord of the Rings. Um, but when you learn more about replicas, and when you learn what replicas are rare and how to spot fakes, then you kind of break this rule, especially if there's a hole in your collection that you just can't fill. But
Mhm.
when starting out, I would recommend to new collectors to avoid knockoffs. Another bit of advice I would give to new collectors looking to collect United Cutlery is avoid paying big bucks for a long sold out replica. You know, um, United Cutlery has been enjoying a bit of a renaissance lately, and they've been bringing back a lot of some of these long sold out items in their catalog. Whether it's a sheath or a sword. And if you wait long enough, chances are United Cutlery will bring, not all of them, but they will bring back some of these if you're patient. So for new collectors, I know you might be like, oh, well, I really want, the sheath for Glamdring or Strider's sword, but if you're patient, you will probably pick it up for much cheaper from Bug Day or another retailer. I would recommend actually joining the Ultimate Collectors Forum for new collectors. There you can find out kind of what's in the pipeline and what won't be coming back. And it's a great resource to learn more about collecting United Cutlery.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the notable and rare replicas from the United Cutlery that you think new collectors should keep their eye open for? For me, the big ones were the museum collection versions of Glamdring, Sting, and Sam's sword. These swords had steel blades, and they're, I think, some of the best replicas United Cutlery made. We could get into the little details of them, but for the most part, I think those are some of the those are the more notable items in their lineup.
Yeah, those two would be, I guess, if you want to use the term grail. I make one slight correction to what you said. I mean, all of, barring a couple of more recent examples, like Thorin's Regal sword, for example, that was made out of resin. All the United Cutlery blades are made of steel. It's just that the Sting and Glamdring Museum pieces were carbon spring steel is the difference.
Yeah.
Your average United sword, like the ones behind you, they're made out of stainless steel.
Yeah.
Which is meant to be easily maintainable. It's basically the same stuff as your kitchen knives. So they won't rust. You just gotta make sure you wipe the fingerprints off of it once in a while. And that's about it. They're meant to be low maintenance, but they're stainless steel. The Museum Sting and Museum Glamdring, those will be difficult to find, especially Glamdring. They came with these cases, kind of like a box that would essentially hang on your wall with a door, and it came with a little key, and there's a map of Middle Earth in the background. It was pretty neat. It was an interesting concept that they had started out with, and I think they always meant to move on to more swords after that. But again, the bankruptcy happened, and that kind of put all those plans into the freezer. Interesting thing, I can't remember exactly what happened with Glamdring, but Sting, they made all of I think there's 3,000 of them. And they were all made, but they didn't make all of the display cases for them. So the last 1,000 or so actually ended up in a warehouse somewhere that belonged to Warner Brothers, and they eventually put them all on sale. They came with virtually no packaging. There was a small styrofoam insert in a plain white box, and that's actually one of the ones that I got. I initially wasn't thrilled at the idea. I've always sort of been averse to companies re-releasing multiple versions of things, because when I buy it, I feel like I want to have the best version in a way, but then I always feel a bit cheated when it's like, oh, here's the new and improved. And I'm like, oh, so I spent all that money on the first one, and now you're, bait and switch or double dipping, whatever term you want to use later, with this special edition that comes. So it kind of bugged me, and out of personal principle, I didn't buy either one of them. But when it was revealed that the Sting actually wasn't completed, and Warner Brothers put them up on their site for a very cheap price, I did buy the Sting, because it has no display, but it looks great just on like inside a display case, like displayed horizontally.
Yeah.
And it's looking at it now, the compared to the regular run of the mill Sting, you can tell that it's a superior quality, better made. It's got better details and sort of the battle damage on it. I think those are great investments if you can manage to find them. The Sam sword is kind of I think calling it the museum, part of the museum collection, is a bit of
It's a bit of a stretch, but I mean that's what they call
a
it.
mislabel. That was not. It didn't exactly follow the same rules.
Yeah.
The reason they called it museum collection is because it's different than the regular version one that they sold. So for anyone that doesn't know, the museum collection version looks like the one that you see in the movie. It's aged. It has the aged look. It looks like the one that Sam has. It's the blade is very weathered. The leather grip on the handle is really dark and aged as well. And then there's a shiny, brand new version that looks like, basically the rest of the United Cutlery line, which is like what that sword probably would have looked like when it was brand new. But if you like to have the piece in your collection that looks like the one that you saw in the movie, then the museum piece is the one that you want to go after. And I mean, the reason they called it museum is that I guess it's because it looks like what you see in the movie, but that's not because it was made out of different materials like the original MC or museum collection Sting and Glamdring. So there's a separation there that folks should be aware of. It's the museum collection Samwise sword is no better made than the shiny version that is non-museum collection. It's just the fact that it's weathered. So, but we do have, there is a return to the museum collection line coming very shortly, and that's Anduril, which was supposed to be the next sword in their line years and years ago, and they're actually going back to that plan. It's not coming in a box, thankfully. I always thought that display idea was a bit awkward and clunky.
Takes up a lot of room on your wall.
Yeah, it comes with a banner. It's a big sword to begin with, and it comes with a display banner behind it. It requires quite a bit of rim. So if you don't have the old the limited edition Anduril, this will be like officially the third version of the sword, because it was the unlimited, the limited, and now there will be the museum collection. But if you don't have either one of those, or even if you do, and you just got to have this, it does look pretty amazing, and I think it's nearly done. So
yeah, it will be the definitive version, I think, of Anduril, unless you want to pay big bucks for one. So, but we'll
unless you can afford the Master Swordsmith collection from WETA.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Okay, so up next we have the Noble Collection, and they're best known for their extensive Harry Potter replicas, but in the years during and after the release of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit, they had a decent amount of Lord of the Rings replicas, from some of the popular swords of the trilogy to Gandalf's staff. They had pipes, but what they're probably best known for is their line of rings, brooches, and jewelry. Many of their replica rings are still considered to be the best and most accurate, and they have the most extensive catalog of replica rings, including a few versions of the One Ring, the 3 Elven rings, the couple of the Dwarven rings. I think there's 2 different versions of the Dwarven rings. There's 2 different versions of the 9 rings given to men, the Witch King's ring, and all the way some really obscure pieces, like a random brooch that Eowyn would wear to the Ring of Denethor. So what are the pros and cons about the Noble Collection line of replicas? Well, I would say the first kind of pro is they have the most extensive line of rings, brooches, and jewelry, and they're pretty accurate. I think their rings are considered to be among the best Lord of the Rings replicas, with a few exceptions, but I think they have some of the best rings out there available to collectors, if you can find one. some of their replicas, like the Crown of Gondor, are the only versions available on the whole market. So they're worth taking a look at too. But the main challenge of collecting the Noble Collection line is the rarity and scarcity of many of their items. Most are long sold out and have been out of production for like a decade or longer. And a lot of their stuff is hard to find and expensive. Noble Collection, but I'm told what they would do, they would release a product. So let's say Denethor's ring. And if it didn't sell very well, they didn't make 500 of them. And then, it didn't sell well. Let's put them all on discount. They made a couple of them. And if it didn't sell well, they didn't make any more. So that is why some of their stuff are really hard to find. Their replica swords are considered to be pretty good, but many collectors, I think, would say they prefer the Unite Cutlery replicas. They tend to be better quality. They tend to be preferred by collectors. Maybe the exception to that would be Hadafang. The handle on the Noble Collection Hadafang is, I think, overall considered the best version available. That's subjective to opinion. That's not to say the replica swords are bad. Their plaques are nice, and they're a nice alternative if you don't like some of the United Cutlery ones. Of the companies that produced a significant amount of replicas, Noble Collection is easily the hardest to collect due to the rarity of many of their replicas and how long ago the majority of these were released. So if you do try and collect Noble Collection and you succeed in assembling an extensive collection, you will have a very impressive collection that very few can equal. And you would have, so if you start out collecting and you collect Noble Collection, my props to you, because it is not easy.
No. Yeah, so I could speak to that a bit because again, like I started collecting 20 years ago, so I was right there when they began to release their first items. And one of the things that began immediately as a discussion, especially, I joined the Ultimate Collectors Forum. It had a different name by then, but I think a bit of trivia, I think we're on the third or fourth version of that website. Anyways, there were a lot of discussions back then, sort of this little minor collectors difference of opinions on the quality between United Cutlery and the Noble versions, because of course all the main swords were being released at the time, like Sting and Glamdring and Anduril and whatnot. I think by and large, the number of folks that will come on the side of Noble to say that their replicas for the weapons in particular are better will be very few and far in between. Generally, the quality and the accuracy to the actual props was definitely more on the side of United at the time. Going back to those days, there were folks that would actually buy both versions and then do comparisons online and kind of discuss that with photos to show, so that we could kind of an early version, basically what we're doing right now, and sort of educate folks that were on the fence, like, which version should I buy? Because back then you had that option. And I think the consensus was mainly that United was better. The Noble, I've never bought any of the Noble weapon props because, again, I like consistency in my collection. That's another thing that if you're just starting out, you kind of have to ask yourself, are you okay having sort of an eclectic collection of stuff from different manufacturers? And you'll find that in most cases you will, because not everyone makes everything. So you may have a bow that's made by WETA and a sword that's made by United, and that's perfectly okay, because but when it comes to companies making the same replica, as in the case of United and Noble, then you really probably do a little bit of research and try to find some discussion online or photos about the quality differences between the two. And then, of course, as what Tyler just said, is that the noble ones are very, very, very hard to find because unlike United, Noble did not do any reissues. So these pieces are, not a lot of them were made, and they're, long gone. So
Yeah.
But just to cite a couple examples, for example, their version of the Shards of Narsil only has the hilt piece, whereas the United actually the entire sword.
And that one is actually a nice alternative to the United Cutlery one. If you can't afford the United Cutlery one now, I have seen the Noble Collection hilt go for significantly less than United Cutlery's shards.
Not easy to find, but yeah, you will pay less, that's for sure.
If you find one.
One thing a lot of folks are not aware of is that their sting is actually it's actor scale. It's not Hobbit scale. That's basically the difference in size of putting what would normally be a small weapon. When you put it in Elijah Wood's hand, the sword is bigger because when they shrank him down with CGI or forced perspective or all those techniques that they used in the movie, Sting's going to look smaller. But if you take that smaller Sting and then put it next to a human, that's the version that United Cutlery made, is the actual. If Middle Earth were a real place and you were to travel there and find the real Sting, it should look smaller because it was an elven dagger originally. So if you want, again, that consistency in your collection of what you see in the movie and what that weapon would actually look like in Middle Earth in your collection, then the United version is what you should get, because it's Hobbit scale. It's what we call Middle Earth scale, whereas the United version, I'm not sure why that decision was made, or maybe the WETA sent them the actor scale prop and they decided, well, this is the size that we got, so this is the sword that we're gonna make.
It could have been. I know that the Noble Collection Sting, the vines on it they're not painted on. They are I believe the whole handle is metal, and then they painted the wood, so the vines are actually, they lift out a bit.
Which is the same as the museum collection version from United has that. One thing I actually disagree with you on is when you said earlier about Hedafang having the best handle. So the difference between the Noble and the United one is that in the United wooden handle, the vine pattern is silk screened on, just like Sting, for example. And on the Noble version, it's raised. I've never seen one in person. I think it's metal. It's a raised metal.
It is. It's metal. The whole handle is metal, and they painted the wood effects on.
See, here's the catch. We asked that Kit Ray that had the original prop. Several versions of the prop have been seen, and he had it in his hands because he designed the version that United made, and he said that the silk screen version is the one that's actually screen accurate. The sword that Liv Tyler actually held in the movie is accurate to what the one that United made, and that the vines were actually printed on. So, and this is the thing that that Noble did with some of their weapons, is that they took a bit of artistic license and kind of enhanced them, sort of interpreted that, if this were a real elven sword, wouldn't these technically probably be actually made of metal and raised? So if you want to take it from that perspective, and that this is probably what the sword should have looked like in Middle Earth, then I guess. But if you want the sword that's faithful to the prop and what was actually used in the movie, then United would be your best bet, because in the actual prop, I think even in the hero version, which is the one that was used in close-ups and had actual real weight for the the actors to hold, those vines were not raised. They were simply printed onto the handle. So there's some difference there. Now, when it comes to the jewelry, and definitely I think they by far make the most accurate versions. A lot of their, like in their catalogs back in the day, and even some of the stuff that's still available now, they will often advertise it with, there's a picture in the background from the movie, a still from the movie where that piece is seen in close up, and then they have their replica in front of it, and you can see where they've taken great care to reproduce that. I've seen some other companies that, including WETA, that make like say the 3 Elven Rings, for example, and they look different. I'm not sure why those discrepancies have crept in there when they clearly have the reference material to make it exactly as seen in the movie. But
another
I definitely think that Noble has the upper hand on that.
Yeah, but I was gonna say another good example would be the Axe of Gimli, the battle axe. If you compare that to the United Cutlery version, the United Cutlery version is far superior and far more accurate than the Noble Collection one. But if you can't afford the battle axe of Gimli from United Cutlery, it is going for a decent amount these days. The Noble Collection.
Word of advice: don't swing the Noble Collection battle axe of Gimli.
Yeah, even
apparently the handle is made of very light, poor quality wood, and because the head of the axe is quite heavy. Again, when I was alluding back to some conversations and discussions from way back in the day, that came up a couple of times in discussing the differences between the Noble Collection version of the battle axe of Gimli and the United Cutlery version, is that people have the handle snap on them from just giving it a light swing. So that's how bad. That's how unfortunate that they cut some corners and some things, and the battle axe especially is notorious for that flaw. So definitely a wall hanger in that case.
So
be careful.
Like to summarize, for new collectors, the Noble Collection, they make some very good pieces, but you're going to have a hard time finding them. So I would recommend really doing your research on those pieces if you intend to collect some of their stuff. If you're a completionist, they do make some great pieces like the Crown of Aragorn. And a helpful tip for new collectors in North America: the Crown of Aragorn, I don't believe, is sold in North America on the Noble Collection website. It is still sold, however, in Europe. So if you have a friend in Europe, and London, they have a shop in London, you can get them to mail you one. Or if you use a mail forwarding company like Reship, they actually give you a box address in the UK that you can then have this shipped to in the UK, and from the UK to North America. So a little bit an easy tip for you there if you want to track down the Crown of Aragorn. So let's move on.
Interesting aside, I think. Sorry, I was just going to mention that I believe that's the only item from Noble Collections, Lord of the Rings and Hobbit catalog that was actually a numbered limited edition. I believe there's 9,000 of those crowns is the edition size. I don't think they numbered anything else. I may be wrong on the actual the chess set, which I have.
They might have.
I think those might be numbered. I don't recall, but definitely on the prop side or jewelry side or whatever, I think the crown is the only item that is actually limited edition. So just something to throw out there.
Yeah. So moving on to last but not least of the major companies, WETA Workshop themselves. So WETA is probably best, well, other than best known for making the actual props, they're probably best known for their statue collectibles and their range of mini 1/6 and helmets. That's if you want to learn more about that, we have made a different video covering WETA statues. But WETA also does do prop replicas, and they kind of do a bit of everything. They do everything from swords and staffs and very high-end swords to rings and some smaller trinkets like I'm going to butcher the name here, the vial of I can't even pronounce it.
Sorry?
Elrond's dad in a jar. The vial of
Elrond
Galadriel.
what? Oh, the file.
Elrond's dad in the jar. Yeah, the vial of Galadriel is was
The Light of
Arendelle.
Arendelle.
Arendelle, yeah. They
Back to
so they
Middler
make a
School
lot
for
of,
you.
yeah, they make a lot of different proper, or you can get the key of Bag End or the key of to the Lonely Mountain. They make a lot of different prop replica. I'd say WETA's biggest strength is their Master Swordsmith collection and their staves. I think they make excellent, good staves. And if you have the budget for one of their museum collection swords, you're going to get the ultimate version of that, short of buying an actual prop. They were made by Peter Lyon. They are real swords. They're not, they're not proper. They are real carbon steel, spring steel, hand ground by Peter swords. So they kind of have a very broad. You can buy, a very cheap prop replica from them. And when I say cheap, not poorly made, just affordable, to spending 10 grand on a sword. They kind of do. They have a very broad catalog of prop replicas.
That was the good old days. I think they're
Yeah,
more.
yeah. So, what are some of the pros and cons of the WETA line of prop replicas? I would say one of the pros is they are made by, and to some people this matters. They are made by the company that made the actual props. And for the films, a good example of that would be their One Ring. I think is the best One Ring on the market. It has direct lineage to the actual ring molds used by is it Hans Jensen or Jens Hansen? I always get them confused. But the actual ring maker who made the ring, you can trace their replica rings. They have lineage to that, and as well as their staves. Their staves. I'm assuming I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming their staves are pulled out of the molds made for the real staves in the movies. But correct me if I'm wrong about that. So what are some of the pros that you can think of for the WETA line of prop replicas?
I think they have more of a willingness to sort of delve into like a few of the little more obscure things, like 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 the key to Bag End, which doesn't even appear in the movie for one, but
Yeah.
you got to assume it exists for that big green door, which is actually kind of cool for them to make stuff like that, like or Bilbo's deed of contract, handmade by Daniel Reeve himself. You could get the cheap version for $30 from Noble Collection, which I did because at the time that was the only thing that was available. Also, you can't find it anymore, but generally the quality of the stuff that they put out is pretty fantastic. So, like I said, and then you mentioned the file of Galadriel. They put out one with a neat little base that you can fill the file with liquid and light it up. The previous version that existed was from Noble Collection, but it was solid, and
it was hard to find too. It was expensive.
I had one. So when again, an example of you wait long enough, some of these things will come around again. I didn't buy the file from Noble when it originally came out, and ended up having to pay aftermarket price many years later, and it was a fair chunk. And as soon as I got wind that WETA was going to make their own version, and it was actually better because it had the light up feature to it, and you could actually fill it with liquid, I quickly jumped online and managed to sell my Noble piece quite handily because it was still highly sought after, and not a lot of people knew that it was going to come out again. And made my money back and then some. So that's an example of just sometimes being patient, or if you know how to play the game, and there's still ways to kind of get your money back and then upgrade your piece in a way.
I would say too, you touched on the deed. You know, they do make two versions of that. They kind of make the affordable. WETA actually makes the affordable deed and contract. I think it's about $30-40. And then they actually do make like a legit prop replica of that. I think it's quite a bit more expensive. But WETA does a great
one
job.
that's not
Yeah.
the one that's not the expensive one that was limited. I think it's a miniature version though. So I'm not sure if they actually have a normal.
Yeah, I think the cheaper one is smaller. Yeah, but you can get like a prop sized one. And they probably for filming did make two versions. You know, the dwarves would have had one that was regular sized, and Bilbo would have had an oversized. Martin Freeman would have had an oversized one. But what it does make great paper prop rep, you know, maps, you know, whether it's Middle Earth or New Zealand is Middle Earth, or that kind of stuff. They do a great job of the paper, and those are made by Daniel Reeve, who, you know, who did a lot of the calligraphy work for both trilogies. So I think that is a pretty cool pedigree that not every prop replica can match, you know. So you know, so those are some of the, I think, the strong points for the WETA prop replicas, you know, whether it's their swords, their staves, paper replicas. One thing for new collectors, I think, to keep their eye open for is WETA does make, you know, some of the rings seen in the trilogies, but I would say they're not as accurate as the Noble Collection ones. You know, like the Ring of Barahir, I think is better from the Noble Collection. Same with Nenya and the Elven rings. I think they're better. Like, you're better off, I think, trying to hunt down a Noble one compared to the WETA one. I mean, that's not that the WETA ones aren't good. It's just that's just how good the Noble Collection ones were and are. So what are some of the, I think, maybe some of the cons of the WETA line, in your opinion?
Definitely a lack of selection, to be honest. As far as the weapons go, unless you're very wealthy, let's just say that their Master Swordsmith collection pieces are pretty much out of reach for us mere mortals, because were started back. I mean, Sting was, and I use the word cheap very loosely here because it was a smaller blade by comparison to the others, but I think even its original cost was around 6,000 or 7,000, and that was many years ago. So I think these days they go for like 15 or something like that. US.
Yeah, and they have very small edition size, like Andariel or Glandry.
Yeah.
Very small.
I think they started out at only like 10, and I think some of the editions have grown to 15 and even 20. And then if you get the scabbard, it pretty much doubles. Yeah. So it's just not realistic for a lot of folks. I mean, what some people have done is like I mentioned earlier, beginning of our episode, to, you know, if you find that one weapon that you really love and you gotta have, and if you want the ultimate version of this, then that's definitely the way to go. But do bear in mind that only a very, very small number of these were made very many years ago, and obviously they hold a lot of meaning for the folks that bought them. You do see the occasional one pop up for sale. You're not going to find these on eBay, that's for sure. So you kind of have to know what online groups to kind of move in to find one of these. It's very rare, and they tend to get snapped up because there are folks out there with money that are looking for them. But it's extremely rare because parting with one it doesn't come easy. No. So you can expect to probably pay, you know, $15,000 to $20,000 for one of these things. So I would say those are just not realistic for most folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
only a very small number of the blades from the movies that they've done. Certainly the the more prominent ones. So when you take that away, there's definitely a lack of variety
Yeah, they
in
did
what you
the
can
Hobbit.
get. Like
Yeah.
as far as weapons, yeah, they only made to my
Couple.
recollection, they made Toriel's bow, Dwalin's axes, Balin's
Alan.
mace, and Nori, is it Nori or Ori? I can't remember which dwarf the two daggers.
Yeah, and then a
And those are
little
all,
like one, and that was it.
yeah, they're all resin. None of their replicas are made of metal.
Yeah.
And I think that's a product of them coming so late into the actual replica game. Like so much stuff had already been out there for years from United and Noble that it just wouldn't make sense for them to start
No.
reproducing those as well, because they would have a massive hill to climb, because most people that have been collecting since then already have all of those. So other than the very niche products of the Master Swordsmith, they are not the company to look for in terms of
Swords.
weapon replicas. The staffs
Yeah.
are quite good, and they do have one that's pretty much unique to them, which is Radagast's staff. No other company has made it. So if you really want to have that one in your collection,
Yeah.
again, long sold out. It goes for quite a pretty penny online now. But all of their other ones have been made either by Noble or United. So that's one that you just kind of like have to do your research online and see which version you like best. But like Tyler said, they're generally like their Moria staff. Did they make the Moria staff, or was that? No, that was United only. United version is definitely superior to the Noble version. And then the Saruman staff, my personal opinion is that the WETA one is far superior to the United one. And then there's the pipe staff is one that both United and WETA have done. That one's it's a pretty close race on those two. And then there's Thranduil's staff, which to me, I think the WETA version is superior. So,
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the WETA staves are all one piece.
no, incorrect.
Okay.
Their two earliest staffs that United made, which was Gandalf the White and Saruman's, are two pieces.
No, the WETA though. WETA staffs or WETA
Oh, I
staff.
thought you said United. Yeah, WETA staffs are all one piece. United's newest staffs are one piece, but the earliest two that they made were two piece. Sorry, the confusion there.
So if you want to create, you mentioned Radagast staff. If you want to create for new collectors, if you want to create the evolution of Gandalf's staff, from the one we see in the Hobbit to then Radagast staff to then the pipe staff to then the Moria staff and then the Gandalf the White staff, you're gonna have to dip into different companies here, if you want that complete evolution of his staff. So yeah, WETA has a lot of different things to offer, but they don't have a lot like weaponry. I think they realize Cutlery kind of has the market on that. And it would be nice to see WETA maybe branch into some of those smaller collectibles that they're the only ones that can kind of do that. They have access to the actual props. They made the actual props, and it would be nice to see them create more props, but if you're wanting to get your toe into prop replicas and maybe swords aren't your thing, they do offer some interesting pieces, and some of their notable ones, we mentioned the Master Swordsmith collection, but for the Radagast staff would be a notable prop replica by WETA. So let's get into kind of some of the one-hit wonders, and we'll kind of mention them here. There were a number of companies that when Lord of the Rings was kind of first released, they kind of jumped on the train, and they released a couple of interesting prop replicas. So the first one I'll start with is Master Replicas. They're best known for their Star Wars stuff, lightsabers and blasters, but they did make two prop replicas. They made the finger of Sauron, with the ring on it, and it lights up. And they did make Sting, and their Sting lights up as well. It turns blue, and I don't know if it's got sound effects, but I mean I have the finger, but I don't have Sting. I don't know if you do or not.
I do not.
So those are kind of something to keep your eye open for. If the Master Replica finger of Sauron does go for a pretty penny now. So just be aware of that if you're interested in looking at them. And then the other kind of notable one I could think of was Hollywood Collectibles, and they made the Lothlorien bow of Legolas, and that is, as far as I know, the only licensed version of the Lothlorien bow that was made. And it has become highly desirable among collectors because it's the only one out there. And I don't know if it was a limited edition, Val. I know you have one.
Yeah, there were two versions of it made. One was I think they labeled it a limited edition, and the basic difference is that obviously it was numbered. I think there were only 300. And so long, it's still in the box. I haven't put it up on my wall yet, but the basic difference, other than the numbering, is that it came with two Galorian arrowheads that are magnetic, and they stick to the plaque, so you display it alongside the bow. It's a wonderful replica. I'm so glad I was around from when that was announced, and I sprung the extra. I think it was either $100 or $50 or something extra to get the limited version. But even the other one, I think it was a very small production, so it's equally as hard to find out there as the limited one. So yeah, it's kind of like pretty much a pink unicorn in the collecting world. If you can manage to find one of these things, it usually goes for a pretty high price. So
yes, it does.
There are a couple of unlicensed versions out there. I wouldn't so much call these knockoffs, but there was a guy in the States many years ago. I think his website was called Bowstick or something like that. You could probably still find some of his, but he got into making a lot of the some replicas of the elven bows, and even I don't know if it was Aragorn's bow or the Numenorian bow, or man, it's been so long and so many people and companies that my memory gets fuzzy on all that. But he had at one point his own version of the Lorien bow, but this was not a licensed replica, but at least it came from a reputable custom prop maker. But I'm pretty sure he no longer makes these, and they're really hard to find as well. So
yeah. And that brings me to our kind of final one. I was going to mention custom pieces. There are a number of prop makers out there that they do make unlicensed replicas, and they are generally very good quality. I would say for new collectors, really kind of do your homework and learn about the hobby, what has been made, what could be potentially being made before you get into customs. But customs can be a great way to fill a void in your collection that of a piece that perhaps major manufacturers wouldn't make. Some of the ones I can think of would be Magnolia props. They make the Red Book, the Scroll of Isildur. They're looking at making Bilbo's Mithril shirt. Then there's Shea props by Mike Shea. He makes some excellent stuff if you can get onto his list. It's very exclusive, but if you can get any of his stuff, Mike makes awesome stuff. And then there's Andy Manson, Manson Props, who he's making some very cool stuff over in the UK. He recently did the King of the Dead sword, and the dagger of of Sauron, which is used to create the One Ring. You know,
Mhm.
those are very obscure things that United Cutlery is not likely to make. You know, and so if those are kind of some of the cool kind of
Yeah.
custom manufacturers out there, guys, that prop makers that will make cool pieces for you. But I would say do your homework
Mhm.
first before getting into customs, and really they're a great way to fill a hole in your collection, but just be careful with them. So
Yep. I just want to mention too that we actually recorded an episode on custom replicas and interviewed two of our friends that are very heavily into those, Mike and Andrew. And so I recommend that if that's something that you possibly have an interest to delving into, like filling in those holes in your collection of those stuff that no company has made, do check out our episode on custom prop replicas of Middle Earth. You'll find a wealth of info there.
mhm. And that pretty much included, I think, what I would consider a great kind of starting point to get into prop replicas from Middle Earth. Thank you for watching, you guys, and if you have any questions, feel free to let us know in the comments. We really recommend joining the United or Ultimate Collectors Forum, and really expanding your knowledge. And if you join there, that you're able to talk to people like Kit Ray, who have been doing this kind of prop replica work for decades now, and it's just a great community to learn about not only just Lord of the Rings prop replicas, but prop replicas in general. So
For sure. Yeah. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to drop us a like and subscribe, and catch our next episode.
yes, thank you, and good night.
Yeah.